What I will do before I switch the camera so that you can see me and I can introduce myself, the quilt that you're looking at over there on the camera behind the machine is a quilt that I did recently with Melissa Marginette. She is one of our Janome Canada artisans, and she ran a Facebook quilt along. And that was sort of right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I raided my stash and made that quilt. So that is covering up my somewhat untidy sewing room. So there's a secret given away. But in any event, there we are. So what I'm going to do now is just flip the camera and say, hi, my name's Liz Thompson. I am the National Education Manager for Janome Canada. So I look after a team of educators and a team of artisans. And what we try to do is support you with all sorts of education programs. Obviously, at the moment, it's very difficult for us to travel. Anyhow, the point is we can't, as educators, travel all over Canada like we used to. So what we've been doing for months now is offering you these Instagram Lives completely free. And of course, they're not just for Janome Canada people. They are for anybody that wants to tune in. So welcome to Sandra from Brampton. Welcome to the people from the States and France. We've also had people from Belgium and Scandinavia also tuning in. You're all super welcome. And what we will be doing as well, or have been doing already, is the team of educators have been working on a program of classes, and we have more than a dozen classes that we are going to offer online. Now, when we traveled in the past, historically, to one of our Janome Canada dealers, we would go there for at least a day, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 days, depending on what the dealer wanted, and booked with us. And we've always had, well, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had an education event menu that our dealers chose from and then advertised the event. And so our events were typically half day or full day events. Occasionally we do a 2-day event, but not usually. And those would be on a wide range of topics, from serges to embroidery, quilting, how to use your machines, feet and accessories, embroidery software, and so on. And obviously, when we're doing something online, it would be really difficult for us to keep you engaged looking at a computer screen for even 3 hours or 4 hours or a whole day. So what we've done is we've tailor-made these courses to be not longer than 2 hours. And as I say, we have more than a dozen of these classes. We have 3 on serges, 3 on cover hem machines. We have 3 on artistic digitizer software, as well as a whole lot of others. I am going to be mentioning these on Janome Life blog and showing samples as the samples get finished. And if you are interested, I would highly recommend that you call your local dealer and say, hey, Liz was telling us about the online classes. I have notified many of our dealers. I have yet to get one booking from a dealer, and I know why, because our dealers have been unbelievably busy. I wondered why no dealers were answering my emails or phoning me back when I left voicemails. And it's because they have been so incredibly busy working, often behind closed doors, although we do know some of their doors are now open. And they have been so busy attending to your needs, selling you elastic for masks and machines. We are actually almost sold out of many of our machines, and we're waiting for new containers of machines to come in. So that's probably why the dealers have been just too busy to book classes. But if you go to them, phone them, email them, pop into the store, if you're able to do that, and say, could we find out about the classes that the Janome Education Department is going to be doing online. I am happy to take bookings for those from any of our dealers. And probably what I'll do soon is publish a list of all those classes on Janome Life blog so that you can have a look. Anyway, what we're going to do today is we are going to look at satin stitching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the camera back to the machine, and I happen to be working on the Janome M7, Continental M7 today. But what I'm going to be showing you can actually be done on many of our Janome machines, not just on this M7. I have a very, very tiny little home office and sewing room, and I wished you could see what the rest of it looked like. It's literally piled high with things. I also have a storage locker about 10 minutes away from my house where I have other Janome machines and things stored, and I run backwards and forwards to that storage locker. So I'm working on the M7 because it happens to be what I have out. I'm busy working on a project which will be going on the website later in August, a quilting project. So as I say, if you are not sure whether your machine does the satin stitch elongation function or has that function, you can always flip through your manual and have a look, and it will show you how to do elongation. At some point, it should be in the table of contents near the beginning. But also, if you look at the front of your machine and you have a button that says E, the capital E for Elizabeth, which of course is my name. If you see that capital E, then it means you have the elongation function. That is what some machines have as a button. Others have it actually built into the screen of the machine, like it is on the Continental M7. So I'm going to suggest that you have a look at your machine. I know that the Skyline models have got elongation. The 8200 and 8900 have it. The 6700P has it. The 6650 has it. 12,000, 15,000, M7, 9400, 9450. There are many of our machines that have this function. Okay, so why do I need elongation function? What is elongation? So what I've got here in front of you, and I'm just going to check the camera that you can actually see. Yep. What I did was I chose a satin stitch. Any satin stitch, it doesn't matter. This function only works with your satin stitches. It doesn't work with the other stitches. And I chose this particular satin stitch, and I tightened up the stitch length very slightly. I happen to be using, and this thread here I will show you, I'm using a Janome, or rather a Madeira poly neon embroidery thread, which has a weight of 40 weight. And so if you look at that particular stitch there, do you see that I still see a little bit of lime green between those stitches, which I'm not a fan of. So what I did right away, the machine defaults to 0.4 for stitch length. I tightened it up to 0.3. I would highly recommend you don't go smaller than 0.3, because then you run the risk of the stitch piling up and kind of getting caught up and not going anywhere, because the stitches are just too close together. So the further stitches that I did there were with 0.3. And then what I did, I haven't gone to my elongation function yet. I'm just playing with stitch length. So over here, what I did was I took this stitch, the same stitch, and I made the stitch length longer. So I do believe that one I probably made it somewhere around 2. And then I made it even longer still, and then even longer still. So do you see what happens? I completely lose the integrity of the satin stitch, because all it's done is it's moved my stitches further apart and made the length between the stitches longer. So if I don't want that, and I rather want my satin stitch to remain as a satin stitch, but this little almost circle here to be elongated, that is when the elongation function becomes really a fabulous tool to have, or feature to have on your machine. So in the second lot of stitches here, I stitched at number 1, the regular default setting on the machine, although I did, as I did here, change the stitch length to 0.3, simply because I'm using this 40 weight polyester thread. However, I have got this little stitch out here to show you, And I have used on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, I've used a 28 weight cotton thread. That means 28 weight, it's a bit thicker than this purple thread. And so here I got what I call better coverage with my satin stitch. I don't see any fabric peeping through those satin stitches. And I did not need to change my stitch length there. In fact, if I had reduced my stitch length too much, I probably would have found those stitches would have kind of piled up and got stuck. The middle one, that one is a 12 weight thread. Now, 12 weight thread is quite thick, and I used a top stitch needle, and the thread was able to pass through that top stitch needle, but you might be able to see, I don't know if you can, let me see if I can bring it up closer to the camera. Do you see that it kind of is a little bit, there's some small amounts of looping and sort of bunching, and that is because the thread is quite thick. So if you did want to use a 12 weight thread like I did there, what you might want to do is make the stitch length between the stitches a little more, or rather stick to a 28 weight thread. Okay, so let's move the camera now to the screen of the machine. And let me see if I can get that over here. And let me move this over a little bit. Okay, and let's get the screen a little bigger. Sorry, hope I'm not making you seasick there, but I did want you to see the screen clearly. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to this little icon here. I call it the twirly whirly stitch. And we're going to touch that icon because it then brings up all the various categories on the machine. Now, different Janome models have the stitches arranged differently. Some of them have them on a flip-top lid and a number. And once you key that number in with a button on the machine, you get to the stitch you want. This particular machine has the categories arranged like that. So you will see that that is the stitch that I used on the green fabric with purple thread that I showed you a moment ago. So let's go, for argument's sake, let's go back to, well, no, let's go to number 1 for a change. And what I'm going to do is I am going to reduce my stitch length to 0.3, as I prefer those stitches to be a little closer together. And if I was to stitch now at the machine, and I won't actually show you at the camera because I'm going to be flipping the camera backwards and forwards. So I've stitched it at the default number 1 setting. But if I go to this little icon at the bottom here, it's what we call the adjust menu icon. Up will come my adjust menu. And do you see here, I don't have the capital letter E, but I have something that says X1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch the little plus button, and it is now going to stitch that stitch out at twice. In other words, it's elongated it to twice its size as number 1. So I've stitched that out. I'm now going to elongate it to 3 and stitch that out. And as soon as we've gone all the way through these settings, I will then show you what has actually stitched out. And I forgot to press the lock stitch, so it's done it twice, but it'll be finishing it off now. And the next one that we're going to choose, the plus sign again, this now elongates it 4 times the size of the original one. Press my lock stitch button and then it will only stitch it once. And then the last one, you can elongate it up to 5 times its normal length. So let's touch this. And we'll stitch that number 5, press my lock stitch, and I will move the camera back to the machine so that you can see it stitching and ending off. Okay, let's cut the threads, and there we have it. That was the original at 1. Then we had it elongated to 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you can do that with any of the satin stitches on your screen. And what I also want to tell you is that you can, combine those stitches in a stitch pattern. So what if, for example, you didn't want to do the separate selections here like I did? What you can do is you can go to your machine, and over here we have an icon that is showing me little hearts in a row. But if I touch that icon, it shows me a heart, a club, and a diamond, which is the icon for combining stitches at the machine. So what I could now do, and I'm not going to actually stitch it out, but I will put it onto the machine, is I can take that stitch at 1, and then I can take the same stitch again, but go to my adjust menu and make it 2. So you will see it's now elongated twice. And then close my adjust menu, select it again, go to the adjust menu and make it 3. And so I think you get the picture. You can now combine various different elongations in one stitch pattern. But there's more, okay? Because what I can also do is go back to my menu and go to, let's say, decorative, and I could add in these little leaves or these clubs, all sorts of different stitches I can add in. I won't be able to elongate those because the elongation function, as I said, only works on the satin stitches, but I could combine those. So let me show you some of the combinations that I've done. All right, let's just check that. It'll take you back to the bed of the machine. Do you see that I was playing with all sorts of elongations? Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the sizes of the elongation. And then over here I was combining different elongations, and the same here. I had, there's the default, and then I had it 3, and then I had it 5, the longest. And then you can also take this nice little scallopy stitch and elongate it out so that in the end it's a very slow, gentle wave. All right, so I've got that stitch out that I did for you. Here is where I started combining the stitches with other stitches. So over here you will see I took a satin stitch, elongated it, and combined it with a maple leaf. And really, the sky is the limit. If your machine has Stitch Composer, which Melissa Marginette talked about on Tuesday this week, so if you missed that Instagram Live, you might want to go to our Janome Canada Instagram Live Instagram page and see the video, because it was saved onto IGTV. And so if you have Stitch Composer with your machine, and many of our machines do have it, you can make your own stitches. Or you can use any of the stitches that are built into your machine. So many times people say to me, oh, I've got so many stitches on my machine and I'm never ever going to use them all. Well, trust me, this is one of those places where you could play with your stitches and use them. And here is another little stitch out that I did, combining different satin stitches, elongating them, and so on. And this particular one here is combined. I did show this sample some time back when I did an Instagram Live on the border guide foot, and I showed that you could use the border guide foot to sew parallel rows of stitches, and this satin stitch here was elongated 5 times its length. So I went all the way up to X5 for that one. So you might be wanting to know, what foot do we use? And you'll probably be able to see, in fact, if I put something under the foot, you may see it a little easier. That is the satin stitch foot with the letter F. I say F for fun because it's the foot that we use with a lot of our embellishment and decorative stitches. And the reason we use it is because it's got a little channel underneath the foot so that it allows the stitches to pass through. And this is particularly important when you're doing satin stitching, because if there isn't enough space underneath the foot, the stitches can pile up and you'll get stuck and you'll be really annoyed. So that is the satin stitch foot F. But there is another foot called the satin stitch foot F2, or the craft foot F2. And you'll notice that that has an open area, which is also rather nice because you can see exactly what you're stitching. So I could just as easily have used that foot than the F foot on the machine. So here is another sample. I took a little table napkin, a store-bought napkin, and I used a royal blue thread, and I did a combination of the satin stitch at the default setting of 1, and then I elongated it. I do believe that was an elongation of about 4. And I then made a pattern combination like we just spoke about a moment ago, and then I stitched it all the way around the napkin. So there I have zhuzhed up a very plain, ordinary napkin. And I also had a rather nice sort of linen-like little tea towel or fingered towel for a bathroom. It's only got the little panel down the one end, so I don't think it was meant to be a placemat or a tray cloth. I think it was meant to be something like a fingertip towel. And so what I did here was I used a bright neon yellow thread, and I stitched various combinations and elongations of satin stitches on the machine. So again, I took something that was fairly plain. You'll probably recognize this little bag. I didn't make this. This is a sample that Jen Tryon, who does our shopping channel segments for Janome, it was one of her samples, and after today I will be putting it in an envelope and sending it back to her because it does belong to her. And I discovered it and thought, I'm going to keep it until we've done elongation. So again, you'll see here, all she did was stitch out the same satin stitch but with different elongations. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that little and she stitched it on vinyl and then sewed it up into a little zipper bag. And this is simply a larger zipper bag with the same sort of stitching on it. And I believe she used a light gray thread on that. But what about if you want to embellish where you put a zipper into a bag? Now, way back near the beginning of our Instagram lives, we did a week where we talked about zippers. And one of the Instagram lives, I do believe it was Amanda, our educator in Ontario, she did it, and she showed how to insert a zipper into a bag. And I'm going to just, make it so that you can see all of the bag. It's quite a big bag. It would easily fit my iPad. In fact, I think I made it for my iPad Plus cord. Where you literally lay the zipper down on the bag and sew around it and then cut that long skinny rectangle out behind the zipper. But you do need to do some sort of embellishment around the edge of the zipper, and there's no elongation here. I just used the number 1 setting for that satin stitch. But I did do a little bit of elongation on this little zippered baggie. You'll see here, this one was elongated, I think 2 or 3 times. And I also have it stitched further down on the bag. And this was another project where you could really go to town with your decorative stitches. As you will see, I made this rather a long time ago. In 2014. So I've had this bag for a long time. It's actually been in and out of suitcases many times with my toiletries, shampoo, soap, and so on in it with all my travels for Janome. But that was a fun exercise where you just stitch out whatever stitch comes to your mind on the machine. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. We've talked about thread and different weights of thread. We've talked about the foot to use. What needle would I use if I was doing satin stitching? You usually use the needle that you're going to match it to your thread, and you're going to match it to your fabric. I this morning put a brand new red tip needle into the machine. I do like red tip needles because they have a larger eye. And even though I'm not using a tricky finicky thread like a metallic, which tends to break, and the larger eye helps with that. But I do find that the Janome red tip needle does a really good job. Okay, you can also, as I showed you earlier, you can adjust your stitch width and stitch length. I showed you adjusting the stitch length down to 0.3, but you could adjust your stitch width as well. So let me just flip you back to the screen and show you that if you wanted to adjust your stitch width, notice that the stitch width here is 9, which is the maximum on these machines. I had somebody send me a message on one of the social media platforms recently, and she said, I really want to do letters bigger than my 9mm machine. How am I going to be able to do that? And I said to her, I'm sorry, sweetheart, you can't. Because if you tried to do a stitch wider than 9mm, you would bang the needle plate and break your needle. You cannot do a letter or a decorative stitch wider than 9mm. If you do want to, then you have to have an embroidery machine and do it in the hoop. So let's say, for argument's sake, I thought 9mm was a little too wide for this particular project. All I would then do is come over here and reduce my stitch width, and here let's take it down to 6. So you'll see that I have quite radically reduced my stitch width of that particular part of my stitch combination. And I think that's more or less all I wanted to tell you about satin stitching. So I'm just going to flip back through the comments to see if anybody asked questions. So now is the time to ask your questions. I don't see any questions. Oh, you love my purple specs. Thank you so much, Lydia. They actually are going to be retired soon. I went to have my eyes tested last week. It's 2 years since I had a last test. And yay, that my prescription stayed the same. It's been going radically down for several years, but it stayed the same. So I'm looking forward to going and shopping for another pair of specs. I think it's like clothing. We get tired of wearing the same thing, and they are pretty, but I'm ready for a new pair of glasses. Nobody's got any questions today. Well, I've got one last thing to show you, and I'm hoping that I can show it to you in its entirety, although I'm not sure I can. This is an apron, and I'm actually going to pull the camera back and lay this over the machine. Let me just hook that over the threads there. And then let me adjust the camera. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, I had one of those professional chef's aprons lying around, and I thought, well, this was a great opportunity to embellish it with some elongation. So as you can see, I used 28 weight thread, and I did a combination of an elongated satin stitch and a different one there, and then a pretty little flower, and I stitched that all the way around the apron, along the hem and everywhere. And then I took that lovely little satin stitch scallop, or scallop if you come from where I come from, and I elongated that and stitched it in a slightly different turquoise color. And then of course you need as well to have some other embellishment. And so I wanted to remind you, and this is more for our Janome Canada people, we did a blog post a while ago about our partnership with Sew for Home. And Sew for Home digitized and made available to Janome Canada exclusively 21 beautiful designs, and this food mixer is one of them. And those designs are available from your Janome Canada dealer. All the dealers were sent information about this, and if you want to find out more, please go to our janome.ca page, and then go to the Inspire tab, and then scroll down to see Sew for Home. And if you click on that, there is a whole lot of information there about these designs and how you can get them. They are exclusively, as I say, for Janome Canada customers. So you would need to phone your dealer, and if you've already bought a Janome embroidery machine from them, or you are thinking of buying a Janome embroidery machine, they will be very happy to give you those 21 designs. Probably the easiest is to give them a USB stick and have them load it onto a stick for you. We're not making them available as a download. We wanted you to go to your dealer. Even if it's an email or a phone call to your dealer, you don't actually physically have to go into the dealer. And I stitched that out in the turquoisey colors to match. Also on our website, under that same place, Sew for Home, you will see 2 PDF files that you can download, and they have got instructions about using these designs on tea towels. And there are there's 7 designs. The Mix Master is one of them, and then we have the 7 days of the week in English and French, and that brings us up to 21 designs. So you could make a different tea towel or napkin, face cloth, or who knows, all sorts, placemats, whatever you want. You could even have an apron for every day of the week. So as I say, those designs are available, and I just wanted to remind you about that, and to say thank you all so much for tuning in today. This must be somewhat of a record for me, only 31 minutes. So I'm going to sign off, and then just remember that if you tuned in late and you missed a little bit of the presentation, after this, it will be saved to IGTV, so you'll be able to pick that up on the Janome Canada page, Instagram page. And then, not immediately, because Erin, who does the editing of our videos, is actually on vacation at the moment. But when she comes back from vacation, I will get her to edit this and put this video on our Janome Life YouTube channel under Instagram Live classes. So I think that's about it. The only other thing I did want to encourage you to do is don't forget about your dealers. Many of them are opening up now. I saw there was another area in Ontario was opened up to level 3 or something yesterday, whatever that means. So check with your dealer and make sure you pop in and see them if you need anything to keep going with your sewing. Maybe you need some Madeira thread. Maybe you need these beautiful designs from Sew for Home. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, and you're very welcome, Celine. Thank you for listening as well. Bye, everyone.